where you're invited to our hospitality after the service. And Kathy's in there now preparing. Those joining online, we welcome you to stick around online and have a online coffee hour with each other, get to know each other a little better. A reminder that our visiting minister, Ember Kelly, has regular office hours on Saturday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. To schedule a meeting, please email Ember at minister@uucsi.org. See the weekly newsletter for more info on that. Weekly gatherings include our women's group via Zoom, held every Tuesday from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. See Kathy Santos for information as needed. And for the men's group, sometimes I join, gather in person via Zoom every other Monday evening. See Tom Saluga for information as needed. And please support our social media outreach. Please like and share our weekly posts on Facebook and Instagram, and remember all of our services are on YouTube, including today's service eventually will be put to YouTube. For those joining us in person, we gently remind you to please silence your mobile devices at this time. And now let us prepare for this morning's service. Once again, we'll choose our words from the Gray Hymnal. So if anybody wants to read along, it's going to be page 429 of the Gray Hymnal. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. And that was from William F. Schultz. And now I invite you to join me in lighting our chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We light this chalice in the search for truth and the spirit of love. We unite in worship and fellowship. And now, as an extension of our chalice lighting, we'd like to take a moment of silence to light these candles for some of the names of those who have recently been affected by police brutality. We cannot cover all of the names of those affected, but this morning we will light a candle for the life of Freeman Sherman Jr., for the life of Alexander Yepes Ortega, and for the life of Jordan Cole. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim that Black Lives Matter. And now, please join us for our opening hymn, number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come in your gray hymnal.
Open
Now is the time in our service when we share our joys and our sorrows. If you're visiting us for the first time, you may introduce yourself at this time. For those gathering in person, we invite you to raise your hand and then stand where you're seated. I'll give you this microphone to share your joy or your sorrow. We invite you to share what's in your heart. And for those joining us online, we invite you to type into the chat your joys or sorrows. Ben will read them aloud. We also invite you to share what's in your heart. Normally in a moment, but for now, Erol's going to come up and offer our reading for this morning.
Good morning. Our reading today comes from a book written by the anarchist geographer David Graeber, entitled Direct Action and Ethnography. And it reads like this: direct action is a form of action in which the means and ends become effectively indistinguishable. A way of actively engaging with the world to bring about change, in which the form of the action, or at least the organization of the action, is itself a model for the change one wishes to bring about. At its most basic, it reflects a very simple anarchist insight, and it's this: that one cannot create a free society through military discipline. One cannot create a democratic party society by giving orders, or a happy society through joyless self-sacrifice. At its most elaborate, the structure of one's own act becomes a kind of micro-utopia, a concrete model for one's vision of a free society. And here ends our reading.
Thank you. That's good. I got to read along. I paused a little longer. If anyone wants to see it, it's good stuff. So now is a time in our service where we take an offering. We know it's the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather. For those attending in person, we will pass the collection plate. Please, if you'd like, use the envelope you'll find in the pew, write your name, and indicate if your offering is a part of your pledge or as a donation. And for those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through the PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can. Our offering will now be greatly received. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. And now please join us in singing hymn number 291, Die. I'm going to let Kevin pronounce that one.
Okay, my high school German, I'll give it my best. Die Gedanken sind frei. Okay, you have to say it in the first verse. Die Gedanken sind frei. Please rise. Rest is easy. Next week.
So I had to Google that. Google Translate said, "My thoughts are free." That's, I don't know, any German speakers can weigh in on. Google did a good job on that. So we're gonna get to hear from Erol King Delos Santos in a moment. After he speaks, we're gonna try the same thing as last week, do a little question and answer. So if his message brings up any thoughts or questions for you all, you can, after he speaks, we'll have an opportunity to do that. So Erol Delos Santos holds a Master's of Science degree from Rutgers University and is in his final year as a Master's of Divinity student at Union Theological Seminary. He's also an aspirant with the Unitarian Universalist Association on the path of ministerial fellowship. He was the 2022 to 23 intern minister at the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Shelter Rock, as well as the executive director of the Distillery, a Unitarian Universalist preaching conference. Currently, he is the membership coordinator at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northern Westchester. And I asked him, is that the one Emily's at? And he said, yes. So there's a connection. And Emily DeTar-Burt, for those of you who don't know, our minister a few years back. And he's a member in good standing at the Fourth Universalist Society, where he's embraced in love, care, and sponsorship. It's great to have you with us, Erol.
Thank you for that warm welcome. All right. In my mid-20s, I found an old photo album from when I was a very small child in the Philippines. And I remember the time growing up, our little blue house in a community called Soldiers Hills in the island of Luzon. My mother worked very hard as a stenographer for the Supreme Court, and she made a modest living supporting us and our extended family. And I noticed in a picture in that album several gorgeous objects, but something about them struck me as odd. Whether it was a large framed mirror that hung on the wall or gorgeous wind chimes or crystal lighting fixtures, there's always something within it that carried a flaw, a missing string of shells, a cracked upturned corner, several chipped crystals, and there was always something that drew the eye away from the beauty of a piece to a strange broken element. And I asked my mom why this was, and she responded like this: "My sweet boy, whenever we would go to the mall, you were always attracted to these beautiful shiny things, and you would walk into the store and then run around and break everything. And then I would have to buy them. And that's why we have so many beautiful broken things in the house." And I swallowed really hard and apologized, laughing, apologizing to my mom. But beneath that over-dramatized apologizing, I smiled. And my mother revealed to me through that story that I was once a really wild child. She reminded me that I was mischievous, that I was tough, that could run headfirst into a wall and then come back from it. And this is the basis of our homily this morning. Yeah, we're going to talk about the nature of Unitarian Universalism and anarchism, but also this notion that we as a people need to come together and collectively remember. And in that remembering, and we will revisit anarchist thought, behavior, and how it organically reveals itself in us, even if we do not recognize it as anarchism at first. Nathan Schneider wrote an introduction to a book called On Anarchism by Noam Chomsky, where he noted that modern-day anarchists are continuing to carry out anarchist thought and anarchist practices without fully identifying their beliefs and practices as anarchism. Schneider identifies pivotal moments in history that ignited anarchist ideologies and how some of these events had been lost to history. History that doesn't appear in our public school education curriculums, that isn't widely available in our public resources and sources of information. Anarchism, much like the sound bites that describe the dangers of socialism in conservative media, has been tarnished and degraded into a caricature of a person whose identity is hidden behind a black bandana, spray paint in one hand and the other one throwing a brick through a Starbucks. And while I cannot deny that this too is a feature of anarchism, anarchism is more elegant than that. Socialism is more complex than that. So this brings me to a brilliant demonstration of anarchism by an individual on TikTok named Kristen Fiore, a trans non-binary person who sought to display what everyday anarchism looks like, what it feels like when it's scaled way, way, way down. A tree had fallen on a hiking trail that was usually accessible to the general public. Kristen took it upon themselves to borrow an axe, split the tree in half, and move it to the side of the trail. The procedure to move such an obstacle required a call to park services, collecting data and information, closing down the park, dispatching workers, and so on. Instead, they did not ask for permission. They did not call any authorities or look at any policies or procedures in place to clear this trail. There were no phone calls, no work orders, no budget allocations. They simply used their own resources and skills to clear the path for their community. The caption that read above the video read, "This is anarchy." This is anarchy stripped of its complexities, brought down to practical everyday applications. This is anarchy in its most accessible form. Does not require Molotov cocktails or the willingness to burn down buildings, but it does require a few things: a love for the fullness of your own humanity and the humanity of others, an understanding of systems of oppression, and a willingness to act to disrupt it. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's something that's echoed through our Unitarian Universalist principles. The warped mainstream media vision of an anarchist would have you believe that an anarchist would be setting fires to businesses, when in truth, we are shoulder to shoulder with them in soup kitchens, building homes for the houseless, tilling land and growing food to help people loosen their dependence on unethical, mass-produced agricultural products, just to name a few things. One way to understand anarchism is to pay attention to those who seek to do away with it. Large corporations, politicians, police officers, military leaders do not like anarchism because it does not believe that authority should be centralized in a select few. In a society built on top-down hierarchical thinking, anarchism opposes that and believes that authority should be reflected in the will of the people, and the authority should be spread horizontally across everyone. Capitalists, the corporate elite, the oligarchs who stand to benefit from the exploitation of the working class do not like anarchism because it seeks to liberate the working class by returning the means of production back to the worker so that they are able to realize the full value of their labor, the full value of their autonomy, and to loosen the idea that our worth is tied to how much we can produce. Now, if that sounds familiar, it should, because anarchism grows out of socialism. The saying goes, not all socialists are anarchists, but all anarchists are socialists. In September, I'm reminded of an event in September 17, 2011 at Zuccotti Park, in the very beating heart of Manhattan's financial district. Individual leftist protesters from different backgrounds and contexts came together in order to address all the flaws of the American economic reality: wage inequality, corporate influence in politics, bank reform, student loan forgiveness, predatory loans, and so much more. It was clear that instead of centralized leadership, this event was seen as a mosaic of issues being raised and brought to the front. Issues were heard from a wide number of people determined to talk about their own past traumas and why it was important to determine the capitalist machine as it exists now. To dismantle the capitalist machine as it exists now. This event was known as Occupy Wall Street. It awakened anarchist thought in many burgeoning leftists, including me. At the time, I was exploring how the current capitalist structure contributed to an entire world of injustices. Someone once approached me after a sermon I delivered on capitalism and walked me through the idea that racism was indeed born through America's long history of slavery, and that slavery was born of the capitalist need for free labor. All slavery throughout our civilization and civilizations before were born to serve the elite class in order to further economic powers of capitalism. The nature of capitalism in this country is so vast and infinite that it would seek to empty the world of its resources in order to turn a profit. whether it's bottling underground spring water, deforestation, fossil fuel consumption, industrial overfishing, and other practices that would cause untold effects in the world, can all be traced to this capitalist urge, this capitalist hunger to produce. Occupy Wall Street sought to connect this unending greed to the ravages of society, like poverty, like people who do not have adequate access to healthcare, transportation, food, water, shelter, education. All are directly linked to systemic injustices. All are directly linked to the creation of a class of people whose worth and dignity had been taken away. This isn't antithetical to the principles of Unitarian Universalism. In fact, Unitarian Universalists who hold the 8 principles in their heart and carry them forward in their practices should stand in direct opposition to the capitalist systems that aim to degrade our fellow siblings. Anarchism agrees with the Unitarian Universalist polity. It agrees with the way authority of a congregation is distributed equitably among its stakeholders, and that everyone carries the burden of sustaining the infrastructure that reaps the rewards of a shared community. Now, I'm not going to pretend that carrying an anarchist identity isn't dangerous. It is. In one instance of the international presence of anarchism, an international presence of anarchism can be found in Paris, France, from March 18 to May 28 in 1871. Paris, with its history of revolutionary action, was defended by National Guards during the Franco-Prussian War. Fueled by social unrest from the working class of the time, the soldiers of the National Guard surrendered control of the government to the Paris Commune. And the Paris Commune put forth progressive policies like the abolition of child labor, the remission of rent, self-policing, and the right of employees to take over an enterprise deserted by its employers, and so much more. And that opened the way to feminist, socialist thought and policy. The National Guard of France responded to this by sending military forces forcibly to overthrow the Paris Commune, resulting in the execution of 10 to 20,000 communards, demonstrating to the world that revolutionary action of this magnitude comes with consequences. Known anarchists who immigrated to the United States were persecuted. And in this case, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, anti-anarchist, anti-immigrant, and anti-Italian sentiments in the United States allowed for the hostile treatment of these anarchists. Even though their innocence is still studied to this day, even though protests of the time erupted internationally, they were still sentenced to death by electric chair. And so I've been talking about some pretty tough things this morning, and the rough edges of anarchism can seem unattractive to a polite society. But there are those among us whose survival depends on revolutionary change. As Nathan Schneider suggests, anarchist thought and practice is less of an intellectual pursuit than a corner people have been backed into. There are those among us who are unaware of the cracks in society, then broken of the expensive elements of our environment. They can only see the new shiny aspects of our reality. Sometimes it takes the plight of a few to remind us that we are also wild and defiant, that at any given point we can interrupt, break, and recreate systems, structures that serve all people, that revolution is right around the corner, and that there are those who will use their light to bring forth a durable change. Amen and blessed be.
Thank you, Erol. You can stay right there, maybe. And does anybody have any questions for Erol? Rose?
Hi, thank you very much. Sound like Elvis, thank you very much. Anyway, a conclusion I made while you were speaking is that anarchy, in a not dramatic sense, but I think you started out with how is it practically practiced. A conclusion I started to see in my mind and think about was anarchy is a form of democracy, in as much as, and I'd like to know your thoughts on that. This is a conclusion I've come to, a form of democracy in as much as a demonstration is a form of anarchy as you described it. It's also a form of democracy. A letter writing campaign, and again, it's not letters about just anything, letters about what's right, what's not being followed that's right, and what's for the general good. Let's just say that's an old-fashioned term. I wouldn't know what you would do now in lieu of letter writing. Maybe you'd go on the internet, or whatever you do, that. So isn't that a form of democracy, and isn't that also a form of anarchy? And what is your thought? Does anarchy have to be explosive and dramatic, or can it be a peaceful demonstration in down Forest Avenue?
Yeah, it can absolutely be both, right? Democracy. So democracy and anarchy point towards a common place, which is a free society where power is distributed, and that, you know, the will of the people are the thing that's being placed forward. So yes, in that way, democracy and anarchy like meet, because there are some people who think democracy is one way, right? And actually it is not in alignment with anarchy, but in the way that you had posed it, that's correct. They are running parallel.
Thank you so much for coming and bringing this topic to us. I do have a question.
Sure.
The young people that we're marching with these days say, there is only one solution: liberation, revolution. And you know, that word revolution means so much to different people.
Yeah.
And you know, with a lot of people associate revolution with violence, and you know, people getting killed. I think that because of the revolutions that we've seen, the revolutions that we read about in history, what revolution would you think of when you hear that chant? And what, from an anarchist's point of view, what would an anarchist think? Because they say it with fervor. And you know, as somebody who wants to stay nonviolent, I want to make sure that I am in a dialogue with them about that.
Oh, that's a great question. And I can only speak for myself. And I would say that it depends on how you are viewing the world, right? If you are of an elite class, you don't need a revolution. The things can stay the same way and it'll benefit you, and you don't need anything to change. When you are not of a certain class and there are systemic injustices in place that keep you down, those systems need to be overturned, and that is the root of liberation. That is the root of revolution, but also liberating ourselves from that system. So I don't know if that makes sense, but when I hear liberation, revolution, I'm thinking people are not satisfied with the way things are, and that there are things in this world that keep people down. And to disrupt it, do away with it, to change it, that is where the revolution is.
Hi, I'm David.
Hi, David.
the question you brought up for me a very broad area. I see that we're up against an extractive, an economy that that depends on extraction, and with also each year. I remember many years ago I was a salesperson, and each year we were supposed to increase our profit by 4%. We had to do better than last year's numbers. There is no infinite source, and our economy depends on taking from the weak and giving to the strong. And that is a worldwide economy now. When you take something away, you have to put something back in order for the balance to be maintained. You know, there's always the yin, there's the yang, etc. To get to what I should be saying here, what would you, how would you practically, pragmatically put something in play, or how do you see it being developed, that we move towards a system where equality exists truly? This morning I saw in the Times a young person in some remote area with a cell phone because Elon Musk has given them access to Starlink. So now that whole economy for them, the simple life they lived, eating berries and yada yada, all of that is now changing, because now they can see that you can't keep them down on the farm after they've been to New York visually, So I don't know what the question really is, but I hope out of all of that system.
Sure. I hear several things out of that question, which is the need for renewable resources, the need for rethinking what capitalism is, because you're right, it does reach for this infinite thing, and we are so finite. Our earth, the things that we have access to, it's so finite. But capitalism is asking us to reach further and continuously until everything is depleted. I think that the first step is to kind of think about that, right? Think about the capitalist structures in our society, name them, and discuss why it needs to be restructured. I think that's the first step with anything, is to kind of assess where we are, what we've come to believe about a certain something all our lives, and how it's different over time, how different things change it, how we're different people now, how much access to new knowledge that we have in order to change something. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the first step would be to kind of take inventory of what it is we are reliant on, and why capitalism is not a structure that we can lean on for a long haul.
Hi, I'm Jim. I have a couple of issues and questions with some of the things you said.
Sure.
First off, if you're, really anarchist, your ideal is not socialism. It's Adam Smith's free hand, where there's no rule and regulation and the economy takes care of itself. And that was an absolute disaster, and it is not consistent with contemporary life. The anarchists in the United States, the syndicalists, the IWW, they were very much in favor of laws and rules and regulations where they were aimed at helping working people. It's not government and rules and regulations and laws and the rule of law that's the problem. It's setting up laws and rules and regulations that work for everybody. Your story about the guy in the tree in the forest sounds wonderful, except that If you leave that open, anybody can do that, then you'll have foresters coming in and taking trees out of the forest, and you won't have a forest pretty soon. So you set up rules and regulations to protect the forest. And when you talked about the put down of the commune in 1871 in Paris, it was put down by not just the army, but basically a counteraction in the countryside. The agrarian part of France rebelled and attacked back at the workers. They did the same thing in the 1820s. They did the same thing in the 1840s. Historically, the country itself was divided, and the mass of the population turned against them, which is why the commune came down. When Marx talked about the revolution of the proletariat, he was talking about what he saw in 1848 in Paris. It was a forecast of something that he hoped for, which was impossible because you have to. I believe in a peaceful change. I am a big fan of a lot of aspects of socialism, believe you me. I have concerns about state-run capitalism, monopoly, as you found in China, Soviet Union, and Cuba. Yeah.
Sure, I'd love to respond to that. So I will say that yes, right? Yes, but also, there are different flavors of anarchism, just like there are different flavors of socialism. I subscribe to the idea that anarchism at its very root is based on direct action without need for all this bureaucracy that is stacked upon us in our culture today. Anarchism needs to be taken out of the context of the global perspective and put into the United States, right? Just recently, about a month ago, in Colombia and all these other great institutions of learning, students took to the streets and they formed encampments on the lawns. And I was a part of that in Union when me and my colleagues would go to the encampment and stay there and protest of what's happening. So there are a lot of things that are wrong with that, and people will create narratives and say, you know, this is wrong because of this. It violates this process. It violates this. It violates these ideas that that we are supposed to uphold in this country. And yet, there is that anarchist spirit, that direct action that propels people forward and have them do what they were doing, even in opposition to all the structures that were built around it. So yes, your assessment of anarchism is correct. But there is also a different type of anarchism that's blossoming in this country. An anarchism that is rooted in that singular idea of direct action, that it doesn't care about these structures, that it wants to actually oppose them in order to move everything forward. Those are good thoughts, and I think I'm going to really sit down and think them through and have it sit with me for a while. But when I am talking about anarchism in this aspect, it is this one thing that's happening in my life in the context of the environment I'm in.
How useful in your thesis is Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha and Dr. King's nonviolent movement?
That's a very good question. Actually, not too long ago, I took a class on Gandhi and King, and it was taught by Dr. Cornel West. And I learned a lot from that class when it came to exchanging information, that people will need to talk about these things, these overarching ideas, but bend them in the way that it's useful to them. So what nonviolence might mean to someone in a farm in the center of the Philippines might have lower stakes than nonviolence here in America, right? So it comes with a lot of different cultural factors that I think we need to consider and think about in order to truly define what nonviolence means. Does nonviolence mean not actively being aggressive physically? Does it mean exerting violence when it comes to protecting yourself? You know, like, what does that mean? So it's a lot of things to think about. And yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't give you a more solid answer, but that's how I would kind of think about it.
And Erol is joining us for coffee hour, so we can continue to have this discussion. Maybe one more if one more person. Okay, March.
Okay, this really isn't a question, it's more of an observation.
Sure.
Before I came here this morning, I had the TV on and there was a program about Japanese honeybees. Now, honeybees, it would seem, are, they're very rigid and but they don't have a boss. Yeah, there's the queen bee, and her job is to lay the eggs. And then there's the drones who just hang out waiting for their chance to mate with the queen. And then 90% of the colony is the worker bees. And the worker bees basically have three functions. One of them is to go out and get the honey from the flowers. The second one is to get the wax, make the cells in the colony. And then the third job is basically clean up. Clean up after the queen, clean up after in the nursery, stuff like that. And when they're ready, when there are enough of them in the colony is overcrowded, they decide as a group where they're going to go. And one other thing I wanted to say about the workers, with those three jobs, everybody does them. You do one for a couple of weeks, then you do the next one for a couple of weeks, then you do the next one for a couple of weeks. So if they get attacked and they lose individuals, they still have others who have done that job, who are ready to do that job. And, but like I said, nobody's the boss. They just do it. And it seems to me like these Japanese honeybees have it much more together than the human race does. And it's like anarchy. They just do what needs to be done, and they don't kowtow to anybody.
That's great. That's a great analogy. I think, yes, absolutely. We can learn a lot from the structure of honeybees and how they just do the things that they need to do, and they, they want to meet a goal, and they do it. Like, they don't care if you're allergic. They don't care if you, they don't follow, like, policies. They just do.
Erol, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Yeah, now our closing hymn. Please join us in singing hymn number 301, Touch the Earth, Reach the Sky, in your gray hymnal. Please stand as you're able. I invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. You can find the affirmation in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And we'll have our closing words and then our postlude. Our closing words can be found in the gray hymnal, number 689, words by Paul Robeson. If you want to follow along or speak along. 689. Sorrow will one day turn to joy. All that breaks the heart and oppresses the soul will one day give place to peace and understanding, and everyone will be free. Thanks, Eric and John. Please join us for hospitality.